Hey guys, so this week we're going to be talking about intelligence. What is intelligence? This video is going to introduce you to the concepts of intelligence. It is a hotly debated topic. We're not totally sure how to define it, so it's kind of hard to define, but we're going to do our best. So what is intelligence? This question has been debated on for years and years and years, and it is still debated on. We can't really come to a complete consensus on what intelligence is. It's really hard to define. But most theorists can agree on one thing. They can agree that intelligence is some sort of sets of abilities that people with higher intelligence might have a higher level of a certain ability than someone with a lower level of intelligence. And some sets of abilities that nearly all of theorists agree upon are the following. So intelligence is the ability to classify patterns. So when you see an object for the first time, you can link it to maybe a different object you've seen before and know that those things are related to each other. So this means that you assign non-identical stimuli to classes. So an example of this could be words in a language. Have you ever seen another language before, like writing or text of another language that you don't speak or read? You don't understand the language, but you're familiar enough with it to kind of know the structure of the words, kind of know what that language looks like at least. So if you see a completely different sentence or a completely different word of that language, you're able to guess that it's that same language. Has that ever happened to you? And then there's also modifying behavior adaptively. Higher intelligence means that you are able to do this, which means that you are able to change your behavior given the situation. And this is really important. It's really related to what we were just talking about. It's learning from experience. So you can change your study habits after exams. Maybe you didn't do as well as you wanted to after the last exam. So you change how you studied. And then there's reasoning deductively. So this is making logical inferences from stated premises. So this is adding two and two together. This is taking one piece of information and taking another piece of information and seeing what is the most likely thing from those two pieces of information. So an example of this is called the transitive property. So an example of the transitive property would be all men like ice cream, and Steve is a man. So by the transitive property, Steve likes ice cream. Because you are applying that first concept to the second concept. All men like ice cream. Steve is a man, so Steve must like ice cream. And then there's reasoning inductively too, which is related to deductively. But this is generalizing by going beyond that specific information given. So we were given information about Steve and about men. But what about Tim? We don't have really any information about Tim, but I could go ahead and generalize to him. Does Tim like ice cream? Assuming that he's a man, you could inductively reason that, yes, he does like ice cream. Then there's also developing and using conceptual models. This is when you form an impression of the world and how the world works. And then you use that model to understand and interpret events. We all do this. Some just do it better than others, and specifically in certain aspects of the world. So some people have just better understanding for how certain areas of reality work. Maybe it's electronics or mechanics or math or physics or art, music. But another example of this could be that I could assume that if I picked any one of you in this class, I could pretty confidently say that you know how to read and tell time. Because most likely you do. Most people know how to do this, at least college students. But I can't assume that any random student in this class could walk a tightrope. That is a skill that not as many people know how to do, because that is my impression of the world and how it functions. Not as many people know how to walk a tightrope as tell time, because walking a tightrope is much more difficult. And then finally, there's understanding, which is a very important part of intelligence. This is seeing relationships in problems and appreciating the meanings of these relationships. And knowing the meaning of relationships within problems will help you solve those problems. So an example of this is when you have two friends fighting and you understand both sides of the fight. You understand why one friend is upset and you understand why the other friend is also upset. You can see why the other one thinks the other one's wrong. So then you can apply that to a solution to get the two to see the other person's side and to get those two to get along again. So you can mediate that argument. So I'm going to show you two videos of two different friends goofing around, but they're goofing around in very different ways. One is an example of intelligent goofing around. The other one is an example of a not so intelligent goofing around. So see if you can apply all of those abilities to these videos. that is super goofy, but that took a lot of planning and a lot of time. And they really had to understand what would happen for each individual Mentos, and that required a lot of organization and timing. So that's pretty intelligent. But you could also argue that it's not super intelligent to buy 101 2-liter bottles of Coke and 523 Mentos. That's excessive. All right, let's see the example of not so intelligent behavior.
You got this for sure.
Hmm?
You okay, man?
Yeah, he's not okay. Well, I mean, he's alive. He just got knocked out. And yeah, so this wasn't the most intelligent thing in the world because they didn't totally have the best concept of the real world, that maybe this tree branch is too thick and too strong to break against another tree. So, there's another question that we should answer with intelligence. Where does it come from? We all have some level of intelligence, but how do we get it? How do we get our own individual level of intelligence? Do we get it from our own nature, that we just have it? We just naturally get it when we're born? Or is it nurture? How we're raised, our experiences define our intelligence. So can we improve our intelligence throughout our lives? Like nurture says? Can our environments help us make us more intelligent? Or are we born with the intelligence we have? So that's the nature side. Do we just inherit our intelligence from our parents? Is it all genetics? Well, they've actually done some studies about this. And they calculate this thing called heritability. And what heritability is the degree of variation of a trait within a population that is due to genetic factors. So let's break that down. So how much a certain factor, so in this case, how much intelligence varies, how much it changes within the population, so within the entire population of humans, and how much that variation, how much of that change in intelligence is due to your genetics. So how much does intelligence change when genetics change? And this is in contrast to environmental factors. So it's comparing the variation in genetic factors to the variation in environmental factors. And what they find is heritability of intelligence is 50 to 80%. That is really high, especially for some behavioral aspects. Heritability, 50 to 80%, that means that half or more of where your intelligence comes from is from genetics. So here is actually a study that was done. So on the vertical axis is the similarity of intelligence scores. So a 1 is completely and 100% similar. They have the exact same intelligence. And a 0 is they are not at all intelligent, or not at all the same. 1 is super smart and 1 is super not smart. And then on the horizontal axis, they're comparing different types of people. So first they do identical twins that are raised together. Twins that are raised together in the same house. And they're identical, so they have the exact same DNA, and they actually came from the very same egg. And their intelligence score is 0.9. So 90% of their intelligence is related. And then there's identical twins when they're reared apart. It drops a little bit to about, it looks about 7.5-ish, or 0.75. So that does indicate that there is some sort of importance with being reared together rather than reared apart. And reared just means being raised in the same household, I guess children. And then they also compared fraternal twins. So fraternal twins are different than identical twins because they do have different DNA. They came from two different eggs. And they have 0.6. So their DNA is less similar than the identical twins, and their intelligence is less similar too. And then siblings that aren't twins have even less similar intelligence, and they have even less similar genetics. And then the people who have the least similar amount of genetics, unrelated individuals, but they were raised together, have the least similar intelligence score. However, there is some similarity. So this does indicate, especially right here, this does indicate that there is some sort of environmental factor going on, but genetics is heavily involved.